Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dr. Deep State with Will Tucker and Dr. Haugen. We have a special guest today from the country of France. You might have heard of it. His name is David, and I'm going to let him do a short introduction, but he's going to kind of be making connections between some of the work we've done here on Dr. Deep State, the whole notion of revolution and how it has deep roots over there in the revolution in France, the Great Revolution. Some of these vibrations we're still feeling today, and we're going to make some connections between this idea of revolution then, now, and try to get our heads around it. So we're going to particularly focus on the notion of crisis and how the church has historically responded to this. Without any further ado, David, so nice to have you on the show. Just before I have him do his interview, he's a native New Yorker over there, especially Long Island, and he's living in France right now, and he's going to tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, well, thanks. First of all, thank you very much to the both of you for having me on your show. I will say that I consider myself a fan. So for a fan to be able to appear on the show is a really special privilege. And I first learned about your channel through Vendée Radio. And I'm a big fan of Vendée Radio as well. And I think that I can say with some confidence that I've watched every one of your programs. It's taken me maybe 18 months or so to get through them all, but I've watched them all, and I'm very grateful for the work that you've done. It's really helped me to understand quite a few things. I really like your interpretation, your vision, the way that you put a lot of different ideas together, and also your bravery and your boldness in going after some of these key issues. So I just wanted to say that at the outset because I'm really very honored to be here. Um, a little bit about myself. Yes, I am from the United States, and I was born and raised in New York. Spent my formative years on Long Island, and I'm a cradle Catholic. I was born at a good time in the 1960s, and grew up in the 1970s on Long Island. When I think back to my childhood now, I realize that little did we know what was in store for us, and the things that we're living through now. But it was a very good time. I had a good upbringing. I I would say most of my childhood and young adulthood was under the papacy of Pope Saint John Paul II, and that had a big influence on my life as well. I went to Catholic grammar schools. I went to a Catholic high school. And I would say that I had a good Catholic education, and I was always very serious about my faith. Um, with regard to the French connection, I think that there was some divine providence that acted in my life, because when I was in high school, I had the chance of taking Spanish or French as a foreign language, and I actually chose French to the chagrin of my parents, who couldn't understand why I did that. But I don't, in a sense, I didn't even know why either. I've always been attracted to France, and divine providence led me to take the French language. When I graduated from high school, my parents gave me a trip to France as a graduation gift. I spent junior year abroad in Paris, and those experiences really helped me to fall in love with France. And I said to myself, I hope that one day I'll be able to live there and work there. And this is exactly what happened. I am now a university professor in the city of Lyon, and I can say that looking back looking back on the past years, I've been very, very blessed to have lived both in the United States and in France. Living in a foreign country enables me to look at the United States a little differently, to see things differently, to see what. Well, you just see things in a different way, and living in France has really opened up my mind and my eyes to to the Catholic faith, to the Catholic Church. I wanted to mention a little bit about what France has meant to me. I moved to France when I was about 30 years old. I've been here about 30 years now, and there are some things about when you live abroad, and especially when you live in France, that are quite interesting. Um, One thing that really struck me about France is how Catholic a country it is, and how deep the Catholic culture is. Growing up in America and living in America, you realize that it is a Protestant country. It's a Protestant country culturally and even religiously. Protestantism is very strong. And what I noticed about living in France was its Catholicity, the fact that everything in France is Catholic. Now, of course, that brings us to the whole question, or in a sense, the problem of the French Revolution. But even before we get to that, when you just live in France, when you walk around, when you see everything, the countryside, the towns, the villages, everything um, smacks of Catholicism. And that had a big impression, made a big impression on me. Um, the history of France is steeped in Catholicism. The language, when you speak French, there are so many expressions, there are so many words, there's so much vocabulary, which not only are based on the Catholic faith, but are even based on the Holy Mass. They're expressions that are taken from the Holy Mass and that are used frequently in the French language. I want to say something about the city of Lyon, where I live. It's the other thing that you get when you're living in Europe and living in France is the incredible sense of history. New York has enough history on its own. I mean, it's kind of a historic town, but nothing compared to a city like Lyon. Lyon was founded 2,000 years ago. It's a Roman city. There are Roman ruins in the city of Lyon. The Roman Emperor Claudius was born in Lyon. And one thing that is very interesting about Lyon is has a very, very ancient Christian community. There have been Christians here, Catholics, since about 100 AD, 120 AD. And one of the first bishops of Lyon was Saint Irenaeus, who was a doctor of the church, and he was martyred in the year 200. Um, Lyon is also famous for the martyrs of Lyon. They were martyred in 177 A.D. in a place called the Amphithéâtre des Trois Gaules, which is about a 10-minute walk from where I live. And one of the patron saints of Lyon is named Saint Blandine, and she was in this group of martyrs. So there's an incredible connection to the early church, even here in this city of Lyon. Also, Lyon is very, very devoted to Mary. And that is another thing which really strikes me and struck me about France when arriving here and living here, is the tremendous devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. And that is the case even more in the city of Lyon. On December 8th, which is the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, we have a wonderful holiday. There are processions in the streets, there are masses, we have a wonderful tradition of placing candles in the windows of every house, every apartment in Lyon. And it's a wonderful thing to see. And so the people of Lyon are very, very devoted to the Blessed Virgin Mary. And that's a great thing. Now, in terms of my own experiences of living here, once I arrived in Lyon, I decided to go to Mass at many different churches. Of course, if you've been to Europe, you know that every European city has numerous churches, and I wanted to go to Mass at each church. And I started doing that. And on the Feast of the Epiphany in 1993, I went to Mass at a church and didn't really know what I was doing, because once the Mass began, the Mass was in Latin. It was a traditional Latin Mass. And I was not aware that this church did the traditional Latin Mass. And in fact, before that time, I didn't really have any interest in the TLM. I didn't really know what it was. Like I said, I was a Novus Ordo Catholic. I grew up under Saint Pope John Paul II, and I can say that discovering the Latin Mass, discovering the traditional Latin Mass, completely changed my life. That was my own, in a sense, a kind of religious revolution. And since that time, it has only been on the rarest of occasions that I have returned to a Novus Ordo Mass, and therefore I have had a tremendous blessing of living in Lyon and being part of this Latin Mass community here in the city of Lyon. It is very vibrant. It is one of the main centers of traditional Catholicism in France, and it has probably been one of the greatest blessings I have ever had in my life. Um, it is. When I attended the Mass, during the Mass, I said to myself, "Oh, so this is the Catholic faith. This is Catholicism. This is the Mass." And it was not an intellectual thing. It was emotional. It was spiritual. I said, I've finally come home. I've finally come home to the Catholic faith. Now I know what people have been talking about up until now. And so I've been very, very active in this traditional Latin Mass community. And even though much of what might be able to say about France could be negative or pessimistic. I mean, we are in a very bad state now in Europe and in France. We have gone through a lot. Nevertheless, there is a very, very vibrant and faithful Catholic community in Lyon and in France. I would say that the revolutionaries have not been able to do away with the Catholic faith up until now, and I'm not sure that they will be successful in doing that. As I mentioned before, the devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary is great, and I believe that France has a special place in God's providence and in God's plan. And so I think that the Blessed Virgin Mary uh, will help us and will be able to defeat the revolutionaries eventually at some point. Um, I put together here a little bit of a timeline, and I don't want to bore the audience uh, with too much in terms of history, but I do want to mention a few points, go over a few of the key steps in the history of France and its role in the Catholic Church. Um, France and the French people are very, very much aware of a vocation that they have in the church. One thing that always comes out when speaking to Catholics in France is this notion, this name that France has is la fille aînée de l'Église, which is the eldest daughter of the church. And the French believe they have a divine vocation, that God has chosen them to be a Catholic nation, a Catholic civilization. And I just want to go over a few points, just a few key dates pertaining to the Catholic Church and the Catholic history of France. On Christmas Day in 496, the king of the Franks, named Clovis, was baptized by Saint Remy in the city of Reims. There was a tremendous cathedral in the city of Reims, and he was baptized there. And we consider that in France the birth of France. The Franks were a barbarian tribe, and they were baptized into the Catholic Church. There were many barbarians at the time, other tribes who were Christians, but they were Arians. Nevertheless, the Franks have always remained Catholic and devoted to Rome. and are very, very proud of this, and they take this vocation very seriously. I'm going to quote from a letter from Pope Gregory the Ninth to King St. Louis the Ninth. St. Louis, Missouri is named after a French king, St. Louis the Ninth, and one of the greatest French kings, a canonized saint in the Catholic Church. And I would just like to quote briefly from a letter from Pope Gregory the Ninth to St. Louis. God has chosen France above all other nations of the earth for the protection of the Catholic faith and for the defense of the Church. The Redeemer has chosen the Kingdom of France to be the special executor of his divine will. So this was from Pope Gregory the Ninth to St. Louis. Fast forward to 1638, King Louis XIII of France dedicated the Kingdom of France to the Blessed Virgin Mary. At that time, he made the Feast of the Assumption France's national holiday. And even up until today, the Feast of the Assumption is the national holiday of France. It is a national holiday. It's not the national holiday is July 14th. Unfortunately, the date of the French Revolution, but August 15th, the date of the Assumption, remains, interestingly enough, a public holiday here in France. June 1675, this is under the reign of King Louis XIV, sometimes called Louis XIV in English, unfortunately, but Louis XIV. And in June of 1675, our Lord Jesus appeared to Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque, who was a nun in a town in Burgundy called Paris-le-Monial. And Jesus revealed his sacred heart to Saint Margaret Mary, and the devotion to the Sacred Heart has always been very great in France, and has spread from Paris-le-Monial throughout France, throughout Europe, and throughout the world. Saint Margaret Mary sent a message to the King of France, King Louis XIV, and asked him, said, in fact, it was Jesus who asked Saint Margaret Mary to ask the king to consecrate France to the Sacred Heart. And unfortunately, the king did not do that. He refused. And many people date the decline of France from this period. And it's true that after 1689, France did enter a period of decline from which it really has not fully recovered, leading all the way to the French Revolution. So shortly after 1689, shortly after
I have
1680,
to
yeah.
jump. I think, yeah, go ahead. I think that's the ascension of the English National Bank, but go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, shortly after 1689, the Freemasonry entered France, and Freemasonry entered France, and early in the 18th century, you had the arrival of what are called in French the philosophes, the philosophers, the age of the Enlightenment, and this led to a deterioration of the Catholic faith in France, not among the general population, but among the elites, the urban elites, the intellectuals. And Freemasonry connected with the ideas of the Enlightenment, the so-called Enlightenment, and the bourgeoisie started to wear down the Catholic faith in France, and these elites, we can call them by a number of different names: the libertines, the philosophes, the philosophers. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Voltaire, some of these names, Diderot, the encyclopedists, as they are also known, embarked on a campaign against the Catholic Church, against the Christian faith, and started introducing many ideas to do away with Christianity and the Catholic faith. It's very interesting to note that exactly 100 years to the day, June 17th, 1689, was the date that our Lord asked King Louis XIV of France to consecrate France to the Sacred Heart. Exactly 100 years to the day later, on June 17th, 1789, the National Assembly pronounced itself the government of France, effectively starting the French Revolution and bringing about the overthrow of the monarchy. Um, I'll just mention a few dates also concerning the French Revolution. Again, this is a huge topic and we can't go through everything, but September of 1792 were the date of the September massacres, when there were hundreds of priests who were massacred in Paris. I don't know if you're familiar with Paris, but there is the famous church of Saint-Germain-des-Prés, and there was a massacre of priests carried out in that church. There were 1,000 killed in the church, of whom several hundred were Catholic priests. On the 17th of July in 1794. So what I'm trying to show, and there are numerous examples that I could give, is the objective of the revolution was really the revolt of a revolt against the Christian faith and the Christian civilization. 17th of July, 1794, there were 16 Carmelite nuns who had been brought to Paris, and they had agreed among themselves to offer their lives on the guillotine to bring France back to the church and end the excesses of the French Revolution. And so these 16 Carmelite nuns went up one by one up the scaffold to the guillotine and were beheaded. And they did this willingly, and they did this as an oblation of themselves to God to bring about an end of the French Revolution. 1795 and 1796 was the revolt of the Vendée. There was resistance in France to the French Revolution. There was armed resistance, and it was fairly well organized, and it was rather successful in the beginning. 1795, 1796, there was basically a war fought against the revolutionary power, and it is estimated that there were 150,000 people in the Vendée who were massacred by the French revolutionary state. And so that brings us to the end of this revolutionary period where the Catholic faith suffered tremendously. I'll continue with just a few more points. One thing that I'm leading up to is the Marian apparitions. Starting in the 19th century, there have been several key Marian apparitions in France. So heaven has not forgotten the French, and Mary herself has come to visit France a number of times, and some of these are very well known. A few of the apparitions are less known. But one thing I will say is that there was a lot of blood shed during the French Revolution, and as the saying goes, the blood of martyrs is the seed of Christians. And the 19th century saw an enormous, when the church was restored, when the Catholic faith was restored early in the 19th century, in the beginning of the 1800s, there was a tremendous, tremendous growth of Catholic faith and Catholic piety in France, a tremendous rebirth of the church. Furthermore, France became a tremendous missionary country, and in my research I found that in 1850, 2/3 of all missionaries in the world were French, and so they went out to all corners of the world. There are a number of orders, the Marists, the White Fathers, the Society of Foreign Missions, and they went to East Asia, they went to Oceania, they went to Africa, they went to North America, even North America, the French territories of North America, Canada. Many, many French missionaries went there and evangelized these places. A few words about the Marian apparitions. In 1830, the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared in Paris to Saint Catherine Labouré, and at this apparition, she made reference to herself as the Immaculate Conception, and she also gave the miraculous medal and asked that this medal be forged and distributed. And during the apparition, of Mary. There are several apparitions of Mary to Saint Catherine Labouré. She she offered up a globe, the earth, to God. And she said to Saint Catherine, "This globe is everyone on the planet, everyone in the world, and particularly I am offering up France to God, and because France was very special to Mary." 1846 in the French Alps, the apparition of Mary to at La Salette. The La Salette apparition is fairly well known. In 1846, Mary called the French people and all people to penance and asked them to, especially to pray because the times were bad. She stressed specifically the keeping of the Sabbath day and not taking the name of God in vain, keeping the name of God holy. She said if people did not convert, that spiritual and temporal disasters would befall France. And of course, that did happen. Again, I'm not going to go through all of the history, but France has certainly suffered tremendously in the 19th and 20th centuries. 1858 was the apparent apparition of Mary at Lourdes, and also at Lourdes, Mary made reference to, well, she even identified herself as the Immaculate Conception. She called for penance. She said penance 3 times. She said, "What I desire is penance." And she asked us to pray for the conversion of sinners. 1871, Mary appeared at a place in France called Pont-Mam, and appeared to children and told them to pray, and that her son was attentive to the prayers of the children, and that their prayers would be answered soon. In 1947, Mary appeared at a place called Ile Bouchard, and 1947 was a very difficult period in France right after the Second World War, where there was a very strong risk of a communist coup d'etat. And Mary appeared to 4 young girls in the Ile Bouchard and asked them to pray for France so that France would not fall to communism. And they did, and France was spared. And so I just wanted to go over the fact that France has a very special place in heaven. God has apparently given a special role to France, and Mary herself seems to have to put France in high esteem, and to consider that France has a special role. So I just wanted to mention that. I don't know whether you would like me to pause, or if you have any questions or something that you would like to ask or say about this.
No, in the sense, because once we go into the revolution itself, it's so big.
Yeah.
Um, but
Okay.
there's certainly, we do see a systematic game plan, and I'm under, my kind of take on this is that there was kind of a faster revolution in France than the one that would take place in America. And both were, one is a more radical experiment, but they both had the same destiny. But both of them were centered on the destruction of the mystical body of Christ, the center point of which is always the Eucharist and the liturgy that supports it. So, of course, in the New World, it was Protestantism that was going to give it kind of a slow death. And now we're living through the final fruits of the liberalism, which are ultimately communism. If nobody can
Absolutely.
if someone wants to vote their way out of this, that's where it ultimately goes. And the planners
That's
knew
right.
that.
That's
This
right.
was the slow burn, that was the fast burn. And so they recovered in some days past, and went back to the nugget of what the attack was. And I think some people identified that and were able to preserve that, certainly throughout the 19th century. When we get into the post-war years, maybe we can pick up on that, and it becomes a little bit more troubling. And I'm going to let you pick up on wherever you want to, if you want to get into contemporary events, but I'm going to let you go, David.
With regard to the French Revolution, again, I'm emphasizing the fact that I am an American and I'm living in France. And I think that in the United States, when we hear about the French Revolution, I think that most people don't really understand exactly what it was, and in fact, what it is, because it's still ongoing. But I think that most English speakers consider the French Revolution to be the overthrow of the king and the putting in place of a kind of democracy and maybe a republican form of government. And maybe that's true around the edges, but it was much, much more than that. It was a systematic plan to overthrow Christian civilization. Um, in the United States, because of the proximity in time of the French Revolution to the American Revolution, I think that a lot of people might have a favorable view of the French Revolution and just say, well, it was pretty much the same thing that we did, and it was happening at the same time. And I think that most English speakers are not aware of the blood that was shed during the French Revolution and the fact that the French Revolution was really setting up a counter civilization, um, an anti Christian civilization. And that was the goal from the beginning. The philosophes, the libertins, the libertines, the philosophers made no did not hide their objectives, and the actions of the French revolutionary state were very, very anti-Christian. They wanted to create what we could call a new man, and this in complete opposition to what St. Paul said in Ephesians 4 about putting on the new man, meaning the new Christian man, the new man
Yeah.
conformed to Christ. And the French revolutionaries wanted to create a different new man. And this new man was going to find his happiness without God, that man could actually liberate himself from God. And the whole purpose of the French Revolution was to build this society without God. And this was done, as you said, in a very hard, rapid way. In a certain sense, maybe they went too fast because a lot of things collapsed on the revolutionaries when this was taking place. But just a few points about what actually was going on during the French Revolution. Um, Christianity was basically banned, and many priests were martyred. Priests were required to swear allegiance to the French Revolution. And if they did not do so, they were many of them were killed. There were a lot of martyrs. Um, Sunday was banned. The revolutionaries put in place a new calendar and a new week. They put into place a 10-day week, and Sunday was simply disappeared. And so there was no holy day, there was no Sunday. And so the intention was to rip the French people away from their 1,000-year attachment to the Roman Catholic faith. There was no Catholic weddings, marriages were no longer recognized. The Christian marriage simply disappeared, and it was the state which took over marriages. And even today in France,
Incredible.
A Christian marriage or a Catholic marriage is not recognized by the state. You must
Wow.
go first to the city hall and appear in front of a statue of Marianne, who was the symbol of the French Revolution, and the mayor of the town and or of the district of the big city. And you have to be married first in front of that Republican official. And if you want, you can go to get married later in the church, but that has no that there is no civil recognition of a religious wedding in France. Um, so all of
Before you go
this,
on,
yes.
I'm sorry. Before you go on, I do want to just connect a couple threads because today we're in revolutionary times. It's harder to see, I think, sometimes for us because this was so like the English Revolution, so abrupt and convulsive and punctuated. But today, the banner is equity and inclusion, and it's always this feel-good kind of stuff that the Marxists kind of peddle before
Mhm.
the totalitarian movement. But yes, this brotherly love, this it's a destruction of hierarchy because we know reality. The church is based on hierarchy, history, and sacramentality. And when those, so that's exactly what's been destroyed. So we got a new world vision, this utopian vision. They truck around Paris, the statue, ancient statue of reason. It's our
Yeah,
version today of trust the science. So you got to
right.
see these topologies are all in place. We're talking about the past, but before
Sure.
people start to kind of shut down, they have to realize this is a perpetual revolution, and these are
Yeah.
the hot buttons that they always click. And that's what it's ultimately, I argue in my book, about reality and hitting that structure. Because yes, the heavenly kingdom, the kingdom we're supposed to reflect, is hierarchical. In other words, it's not about equality. It's quite the
Yes.
opposite.
Yes. Again, one of the following your channel, I was very struck by, and I always have in my mind the historical, hierarchical, and sacramental observations. And when you look at the French Revolution, you see that this was a revolution against those three things. Many French people, and I would even say in French schools, it is taught that time began in 1789, that before 1789, it was a very dark period, obscure, um, uh, kings oppressing
I
the
have to jump in
peasants.
here, David. That's exactly how we're taught American history. There's nothing before 1776.
Yeah.
That's how Protestants are taught. Before Martin Luther, you don't need to know those 1500. Not
That's
terribly
right.
important.
That's right. So, and again, even in English we use the term enlightenment. The word in French is lumière, and um, the whole point is that the prior period was dark. That there's nothing of value, nothing to see here. Don't go looking. It's all dark. There's nothing there, and time, modernity, happiness only started with the revolution. And so the French people were robbed of their history. They were robbed of sacramentality by having the Catholic Church effectively banned and taken away from them. And they were robbed of hierarchy in their society by having the king overthrown. And again, as an American, I have to say, to outgrow these ideas is difficult. Again, I grew up, born in the USA, grew up in New York, grew up on Long Island, and I'm like, yeah, well, that French king, I guess he wasn't really anything great. I guess he was oppressing the peasants and all that, not really understanding that this was a project, and the target of the project was the Christian civilization, the church, and the mass, and all of that had to go. Basically, what the French Revolution did, in a sense, again, the article we were discussing previously spoke about the egregore. In a sense, the French Revolution created a new religion. It created a new man. It created a new religion, but a weird religion in that for the first time in human history, it's a religion without God. And in fact, in a sense, the object of worship is man. And if you think about it, if you look at all world civilizations and cultures and history, that never really happened before. So this egregore that we're living under now is something new in a sense. It's lasted for 200 years, but it's something new. We're in a place as human beings where we have never been before, and it is very definitely ongoing. Um, uh, Again, the French Revolution took a few steps back. Nevertheless, it continues. And of course, we had the upheaval of Napoleon, the various French political upheavals of the 19th century. But the French Republic came back with the Third Republic at the end of the 19th century. And they came back for the Catholic Church with a vengeance. The Catholic Church was reestablished and very vibrant and alive during the 19th century. But in 1905, the Third French Republic decreed what they called the separation of church and state. And again, as an American, when we hear this, again, we hear things in school and like, yeah, okay, we have the separation of church and state. Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, maybe, the church shouldn't be running things and all that. But in France, it was much more violent and much more anti-Christian. Um, Basically, the French state confiscated all of the French property and closed all of the Catholic schools. Up until before 1905, basically all education in France was run by the church. And the two things, I mean, there were many things, but two of the key things that occurred in 1905 was the confiscation of all church property by the French state. So, for example, today in France, Notre Dame Cathedral, every church in every village in France does not belong to the Catholic Church. It belongs to the French state. The French state owns all church property, and that is one thing. So the priests or the bishops, they have no say in what happens to the buildings of the church. And just as an example, again, fast forwarding to very recent times, in 2019 the Notre Dame Cathedral burned down, as we know, which is a devastating event that occurred for us in France. The Cathedral of Notre Dame, the Cathedral of Our Lady, burning down after 1,000 years is really something quite remarkable. And we were petrified and wondering what the message of that burning down was. Even now, we're still trying to process it. But in any case, this became very controversial because that cathedral is owned by the French state. And in fact, the French state could make any decision about how it was rebuilt, whether it was rebuilt, what kind of art would be inside. Um, and in fact, there was a lot of talk of gutting the Notre Dame Cathedral and putting in all kinds of modern art. And a lot of French Catholics were very upset about that. But again, it is the French state that owns Notre Dame Cathedral, and they can do anything they want with it. It does not belong to the Catholic Church. Again, the other thing they did was in 1905, is all monasteries were closed. All monastic foundations were expelled from France. Interestingly enough, some of the monastic foundations in France went to America. They went to the United States, and they found they just transferred their communities to the United States. But all monastic foundations, all monasteries in France were closed down. And then, of course, schools. Prior to 1905, the schools were in the hands of the Catholic Church. All education was really done by the church. Very famous Jesuit colleges, which produced the entire educated class of France. All the schools, Catholic schools, were closed down and replaced by public school, we would call in the United States public schools. And one big term, which was the result of this maybe second revolution or ongoing revolution, is a very special word in French called laïcité. And laïcité is a very hard word to translate. I think in English, we would translate the word as secularism, which we could say is kind of like the separation of church and state. But laïcité, or secularism in France, is not neutral. I think that coming from an English-speaking perspective, an American perspective, we see separation of church and state as a kind of neutrality between church and state. They don't get involved in each other's affairs, and that might be the way that we look at it. But in France, it is not neutrality, it is hostility to the Catholic Church, the Catholic faith, Christian culture. And I have numerous quotes here. I might be able to find one and read it out to you. But it is clearly indicated that the purpose of the creation of these public schools and the closing of the Catholic schools was to make I'm going to have these French words in my head to make or to create repub, French revolutionaries. The young people of France were to be educated as revolutionaries, not to be educated as Catholics. And so since that time, since 1905, all of education in France has been in the hands of the state. And the objective has been to educate young people from the tenderest, youngest age into French revolutionary principles. And those principles, if we want to look at them, it's the foundation of the French Revolution is the rights of man. In French, we say les droits de l'homme, the rights of man. And this is what we hear about all the time in France. Everything is the rights of men. And of course, never mentioned are the rights of God. Never mentioned are the duties that a person might have, duties towards others, and duties especially towards God. And so it's rights, rights, rights all the time. Human rights, droit de l'homme, constantly. And this is what the educational system is geared towards in France. And this is the way French people are educated. This is what they learn. And so it's always rights, the rights of man. Each man, in a sense, is his own God. Everyone gets to decide what they want. Because again, the French Revolution overthrew God and put man in his place. So every man is his own God. Every man is his own pope. And every person determines himself what he's going to be. If you'll permit me, I want to read, I have a few quotes here. I want to read a quote about the French Revolution by a French historian called Jean-Joseph Gaumet, who wrote a book called The Revolution. And he is speaking here sort of in the third person as the revolution. So, but listen closely. If you rip off its mask and say, "Who are you?" It, the revolution, will say, "I'm not who you think I am. Many speak of me, but few know me. I am not the changing of a monarchy to a republic. I am not the change of one regime to another. I am not a disturbance of public order. I am not the guillotine. These things are my works, but they are not who I am. These things are temporary, but I, the revolution, am permanent. What I am is the hatred of any order not established by man. Any order in which an individual man is not his own king and not his own God. I am the proclamation of the rights of man with no concern for the rights of God. I am the social and religious system built upon man's will and not upon God's will. I am man placed upon God's throne. I am man transformed into his own end. This is why I call myself revolution, which means overthrow. I translated that from French from a history book, but that to me sums up what the revolution truly is. And this is what we are living through now, and this is what
Yeah.
French history has been, and it leads us up to today.
Let's take a break there. I want to have Will has not had an opportunity to jump in, and I want to give him.
Okay.
But yes, Father Fahey, Archbishop Lefebvre, both enough about the rights of man. When are we going to hear again about the rights of God? And of course, this is an attack on the kingship of Christ. And the Protestant Revolution had already taken us quite a way of every man being his own pope. But ultimately, one of our theses here is that Christ fills the earth through his being after the incarnation. And so that's being. And that comes from above. From below is the Antichrist, the non-being, and this is what it's trapping all of the elemental spirits in this self-referential reality to take all of the. This is what you just said about this revolution. Its touchstone, its final crowning, will be uh, the Antichrist, who is going to represent all of these aspirations. Will, do you want to jump in before we go back to David?
Sure, yeah. Several ideas here I wanted to touch on. Um, One of the last things you said about the rejection of anything not established by man, and the Declaration of the Rights of Man. And then fast forward to Vatican II, we have Cardinal Ratzinger saying that it's the French Revolution of 1789 in the church, and this sort of shadowy allegiance that many of these French and German Jesuits have to Teilhard de Chardin. And the idea of modernity, of modernism, the new time that we're entering into, like what you all both alluded to earlier about how 1776 and 1789 and 1517, there is no, there is no history before that point. So we've entered into this new epic, and that's what the book of Daniel, I think Daniel 7, alludes to, as the Antichrist will change times and seasons. And the modernitas, modernity, is also in German referred to as the Neuzeit, which is the new time. And that's another tactic that they used in the October Revolution, is to come in and change the calendar around, and have new holidays, as we do. And our sort of, as you said, our national holiday in America is July the 4th, right? Also the founding of the Illuminati. So how shifting of time in this liturgical time of Christendom is shifted into this new liturgy of man-centric self-worship, man in his own image. And it's also, this metaphysical shift that takes place within modernity. We talk a lot about Joachim de Fiore, and this is something that, like, these French Jesuits talked about earlier, like Henri de Lubac, would speak to. He has a book called The Spiritual Posterity of Joachim de Fiore, which is only available in French, by the way. So if you could find me a copy of that, I would be greatly appreciated. But anyway, they have this way of isolating Joachim as being this anti-Christ, anti-Catholic heretic who led to these kind of egregores that we saw hatch in the 20th century, like communism. But they also, at the same time, I think it's a type of sleight of hand that they're employing to exonerate or justify Teilhardian metaphysics, which, as you're saying, the rejection of anything that's not established by man. We have within, the Teilhardian new sphere, this kind of new sacramentality. Even Karl Rahner calls it a pan-sacramentalism, in which man in his own image is coming into the new incarnation. And that's the epitome of the egregore there. So within the new, sorry, I had a little feedback there. Within this new time, we're talking a lot about the de-Augustinianization of Christendom and Western civilization, in which there's no longer, within, like, the Copernican revolution, the sense of heaven above that orients reality. That's the ground of being, as Eric Voegelin and Doug like to say. It's also it's future ahead. It's like the Teilhardian omega point that we're constantly progressing toward through this sort of dialectical process of history, rather than we're in the millennial kingdom already. We have to abide within the liturgy of this metaphysical system, and await heaven patiently. And it's not up to man to immanentize the coming of this kingdom. So not really any questions there, just some observations.
Okay, terrific.
All right, Dave, we're ready for you, David.
Okay, I want to fast forward again. We've been talking about the 18th century, the 19th century, the early 20th century. I want to just for a moment stress the ongoing nature of the revolution. I have a couple of quotes that are very, very recent, from some public figures here in France. One of them is a guy named Vincent Payon, who was the education minister in France. And he said this, well, he wrote a book, I believe it was in 2019. He is a Freemason, by the way. I'll just come right out and say, well, I think most of French politicians are Freemasons, and and I don't even think they hide it really. But anyway, so Freemason, and he wrote a book called "The French Revolution is Not Over Yet." That is the translation of the French title. The French Revolution is not over yet. And here is a quote from that book: "The secular republic is not neutral. It's on the offensive. It conquers. It has enemies," meaning the Republic, the French Republic. "It has enemies. It is fragile, and it can still be rejected. Reverses are still possible. Neutrality is impossible." So again, that quote from this book, "The French Revolution is not over yet," is very militant. In other words, they haven't the revolution has not ended. The violence has not ended. The war against Christ, the war against his church has not ended. It is ongoing. And I think it's a mistake for people to think of the French Revolution and some of these things that I'm mentioning as being events in the distant past which have come to an end, because as the article in the European Conservative that you forwarded to me the other day says, this is we're still living the effects of that egregore. It hasn't stopped. And where and how it will end, or what it will be like in the near term, we don't really see. But it is ongoing. I have also a quote, a very interesting quote from Nicolas Sarkozy. Nicolas Sarkozy was the French president in the early 2000s. And the French presidents on a yearly basis go to make a speech at the main Masonic lodge here in France. It's called the Grand Orient, Le Grand Orient, we say in French. And French presidents about once a year will go and make a speech to that lodge. And in 2003, Sarkozy said, as part of his speech, secularism is a combat for the consolidation of the republic against the Catholic religion. And that is a quote from his speech. So that secularism, the secularism of the French Republic, is one of the weapons used to consolidate itself against the Catholic Church. And so that was 2003. That wasn't 1792. And the quote from Vincent Payon is from 2019. So it's ongoing. It keeps going, and we are living through this today. I will jump back to the time of the lockdowns a couple of years ago, and the persecution that the church went through. We went through masses being closed. I know it's the same thing in the United States, but churches were closed down. The sacraments were not available. Easter was canceled. And it was a very, very difficult time, and we were wondering how could this be happening. But of course, these things did happen around the time of the French Revolution, and so under the guise of a virus, well, these things were happening again. I will say that there were clandestine masses which took place as in 2021. 2020. So the sacraments were available, but they were underground. But it was a very, very trying time for all of us. It was a bad time here in France. We had vaccine passports. We had movement restrictions. I mean, the whole Agenda 2030, in a sense, came down on us pretty hard.
David, I'm going to cut in real quick because I'm thinking of this as a theme working here. And I would say I'll put it at like the English Revolution in the 17th century, the Protestant Revolution. This is all one revolution. And we can go over even to the Chinese Cultural Revolution, to the Russian Revolution. We're talking about one revolution that's working itself out. So with that in mind, let's focus now. We're getting through the pandemic, but I think that's an interesting lens that I think we're working with right here. This is kind of one thing with many heads going on throughout time. So yes, go ahead, please.
I'd like to bring up a few what I might call current events or things that are happening in France. Again, I know you have an international audience, but perhaps most of them are located in North America. I'm not sure of that, but I do want to mention a few things about what is happening both in France and in Europe. And I don't really know exactly how to categorize it, in the sense that um, I mean, at a certain level, it's craziness or insanity, but it is an agenda that is in place and that is moving forward. Um, One of the things that I would like to discuss is the farmer protests and what has been going on. Now, the farmer protests in France have been very, very vigorous. The farmers have been very active in their protests, but it is not limited to France. There have been protests in almost every European country, and I want to give a shout out to the Germans. The German farmers have been protesting. The Dutch farmers have been protesting. One thing that I want to mention, which is very kind of interesting, is again moving to France and living in France. And again, I'm from New York, so again, I can't. Yeah, I perhaps in other parts of America it's a little different, but one thing that struck me when I came to France is how agricultural a country it is. Um, it is, in a certain sense, it's like one big farm with a number of villages and a few big cities. But otherwise, France is really a big farm with lots of cows, and a great number of French people are farmers. Um, and even the French who live in urban areas, if you scratch a French person, a couple of generations, they might be living in Paris, but a few generations away, they're from the farm. They are from rural areas. And so in France, farmers are heroes. They are seen to be real people who are authentic, who are good, who give us food. They are sort of the heroes of society. And yet the French government has basically declared war on French farmers. Now that's in France, but again, it's all over Europe. It's in Czech Republic, it's in Germany, it's in Spain, it is in Ireland. I don't know whether you heard, but in Ireland, the Irish government is requiring dairy farmers to slaughter their cows. There is an order from the Irish government to slaughter 200,000 cows, and is going to basically wipe out an entire class of people. I'm not so familiar with Ireland, but Ireland is certainly a very agricultural country as well. Anyway, why is this happening? And it, it's it's incredible, but all of this is done under the guise of environmentalism. It is said, and again, this brings me back to something that you bring up frequently in your show, which I repeat to myself and to some people around me pretty frequently. People don't love the truth. We are in the predicament that we are in because people do not love the truth. They want to live in an alternate reality. And it's the more I think of that and the more I see the world around us, the more I realize that that is true. And basically what you have in Europe is governments saying that farming is bad for the environment, and people believe it. And I don't know anything that could be crazier than that. But we are being told that farming is bad for the environment, so farming has to stop. Farming must be reduced. Land is being taken out of circulation. Farmers are limited in how much they can grow. The price of diesel fuel. This is why the farmer protests. The main reason, sort of the number one immediate reason why these protests are taking place, is because the taxes on diesel fuel were increased over 100%, and that means, and of course, the farm vehicles, all run on diesel fuel. And so these farmers basically are being put out of business. They can't afford to be farmers. And of course, we wonder why this is happening. Food production is going to go down. Um, we're going to pay more for food because more food is going to have to be imported. So we'll have to pay more. This brings me to a discussion of Ukraine, because it seems like a lot of the food that will no longer be produced here is supposed to come from the Ukraine. And everyone in France and in Europe is mystified as to why this is happening. France is one of the few countries in the world which could be self-sufficient in food. Um, Again, we wouldn't have pineapples and things like that, but I mean, but France as a country could feed, and has for a long time has fed itself. And now the farmers are being put out of business. This is completely insane. Another thing is energy prices. Energy prices have gone up 50 for people like me in a household. Electricity prices have gone up 50% in the past year. And again, why is this the case? Not so long ago, France was 100% self-sufficient in electricity production thanks to nuclear power. France was I think, was the number one nuclear electricity generating power in the world. And France was 100% self-sufficient, and electricity was cheap. Now, there are virtually no nuclear power plants open. Virtually all of our energy is imported, and we are being impoverished. We are actually being bankrupted and impoverished. And of course, this is intentional by the government. Why is this happening? We have censorship taking place. We have one of the craziest laws in recent times was passed just in the past several days here in France. Again, I'm translating from French. It's called a law was passed called the translation doesn't sound very elegant. It's against sectarian. Excuse me, I have to pick this up here. What does it say? Hold on. Oh, yes. Sectarian aberrations. And the law is ostensibly against cults who tell their members not to get certain medical treatments, if you take my meaning.
Yeah.
And this law was passed. It's called Article 4. There's an article in this law called Article 4, which states that anyone who refuses a certain medical procedure, and I think you can understand what that means, is liable to 3 years in prison and a 45,000 euro fine. So in other words, it criminalizes the rejection of a certain injection that people might be required to take. It is called in jest, sort of. It is called the Pfizer Amendment of this law, but it's the law. And so again, I even wonder why is this even on the table? What do they have planned for us in the either near future or the not so near future? But this is now a law on the books in France. And if anyone, and it's not only, I want to be clear, I have the text in front of me here. It's not even rejecting the treatment, it's questioning the treatment. So if you question, ostensibly also through social media, if you encourage people to not get this treatment, or if you refuse the treatment, you are liable to 3 years in prison and a 45,000 euro fine. So that is one thing. Another thing that we are going through now in Europe and in France in particular. Another thing is the economic upheaval that is being experienced in Germany. Germany was the engine of the European economy, and it is at its lowest point since 2006. Energy prices for businesses have increased 300% since the invasion of Ukraine. Because Germany, which used to get all of its energy from Russia, can now no longer get energy from Russia. And therefore, the economy is being destroyed. It is being sacrificed for these objectives or these goals. People are The German economy, which runs almost exclusively on exports, is no longer able to export because the prices of their goods are so high, because the prices of energy are so high. Unemployment in Germany is increasing. And of course, we have to wonder why this is taking place. The German government should normally be trying to reverse these things. But in France, in Germany, in all of the European countries, it seems as if the governments are at war with the people. They are trying to impoverish us, and they're trying to lower our standard of living. And this is simply crazy. Recently, in the last week, this is just in the last week, the Chancellor of Germany, his name is Scholz, said that we have to put into place a war economy and that the era of peace is over. So one thing that really strikes me is that we are on the road to war. That the regimes of Europe are hell-bent on bringing us into a war with Russia, and this seems to be the way we are going. And again, people either they can't believe it and they can't understand why we are being led down this road. Another thing that was just that is working its way through the European Parliament is the Migration Pact. I don't know if you've heard about the Migration Pact, but it is it is basically a codification of open borders into Europe. I know that the United States has problems with open borders, particularly there in Texas, I think where you are, Doug. In Europe, it's just as bad, if not, I mean, again, I don't want to say what is worse, but it's at least just as bad. And the European population is being replaced. We are being replaced by extra European populations. There is no effort whatsoever made to stop this. And now this law is working its way through the European Parliament, and it's called the Migration Pact. And the thinking behind the Migration Pact is the fact that there are some European countries which have refused migrants, who have refused this immigration which is taking place. And of course, I think the objective is to simply overwhelm the European populations with non-European populations, and some of the countries have resisted. So now this new European law, which is superior to national law, states that any country which refuses to receive migrants will be fined 25,000 euros per migrant. So now
Wow.
it is legislation stating that now everybody, basically the countries of Eastern Europe, have avoided being overwhelmed by extra European migration, and but now this loophole is closing, and it is estimated in an article I was reading about this pact that in the next 15 years, 75 million migrants will be able to enter Europe and will basically, in a sense, replace the European population. A French politician named Marine Le Pen said that this is the suicide of Europe. She said, "It is an organized plan for the submersion of Europe and of the nations which compose it." So basically, here I am, I'm talking about how much I love France and I enjoy living in France. And I and I see the importance of France and French culture in the Catholic Church, but I think that in 15 to 20 years, France will simply no longer exist. There will be a zone, an area maybe called France, but France as a country, France as a civilization, the Christian civilization of Europe will simply disappear. I have another quote from the director of the European border police, basically. It is called Frontex. And the director, the head of this European border police, is a Dutchman named Hans Leitens. And again, his job, at least on paper, is to prevent illegal entry into the European Union. And I just got a quote from him that I saw the other day. Nothing can stop people from crossing a border. No wall, no fence, no sea, no river. So basically, the director of European border security has no intention of stopping anyone from coming into Europe. And again, this is also, in my view, is also part of the revolution against Christian civilization. Because what is Europe? I don't know if you're familiar with the quote from G.K. Chesterton. G.K. Chesterton said, "Europe is the faith is Europe." And he also said in the same work, he said, "The church is the faith, and the faith is the church." And if you overwhelm European civilization, that's an attack on the faith.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this stuff is so black-pilled, I don't even know where to go. I sometimes can't look at this stuff. But yeah, on top of everything, you know, we're going to destroy the farmers because they're hurting the climate in our country, swamping it with everybody from every place else coming in, giving them credit cards. Hey, we're going to take your house. We're going to put these people in. I don't even know where to go. So yes, and it is. I believe it's the same force ever since the Protestant Revolution, and these are the fruits of that revolution, and it's the same spirit behind this. Will, did you want to jump in really quick before we get back to David?
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about what you're saying about the restrictions being placed on agricultural ways of life as a way of conditioning people to the new time, where that's destroying memory of landscape and traditional practices of cultivating the land and how these orient people into this kind of liturgical time of European civilization and historical memory and repetition of the way people have lived before, so that they're ready to join the great work of the New World Order, the centralization. And one of the people we quote is Marshall McLuhan, who talks a lot about simultaneity as the sort of time signature of the new electronic age, in which everyone is in this sort of monoculture of time, rather than time being based upon seasons and of relating to sort of traditional practices. Like a dairy farmer's sense of the calendar and of time is different than, say, like when you plant, when you feed, things like that. But I don't think they necessarily want to destroy entirely these sort of traditional practices. Like, they're still going to have the market for the Parmigiano Reggiano cheese, but it's going to be adopted and transformed into this kind of simulation in which it still tastes like the same cheese and it's still produced in the same way, but it's detached from the culture that produced it. Like here, I'm in Kentucky, so the bourbon industry has been bought up by Japanese investors. And so it's still being produced. It's being produced at a much larger scale, but it's not by the same traditional methods that it has been before. And so soon it'll probably be made in China in some sort of factory, but then, put the Kentucky label on it so that people are softened up and ready to adopt this new paradigm, this new global And also they're energy dependent, they're food dependent. They have to adopt these new practices or they can't survive, like we see with and it's almost like what happened with the pandemic and the response and the mandates was a way of sort of a global threat of like, hey, if you don't adopt, if you're not willing to be on board with whatever the regime is asking of you, then you're going to be left behind, and there's no future for you.
Yeah, I want to jump in really quick before you go, David. Yeah, it just reminds me, I think there's a misnomer about this idea called culture wars. What's being attacked on us is anti-culture. It's the destruction of culture because organic cultures, wherever they are going to exist, point to natural law. Within the kingship of Christ, they're going to point to Christ and his mission and how we participate in that mission. And I think it's important to kind of get about that. I like your reference there. So whereas it's the antithesis of Christendom, where every part of human effort and imagination and will went upwards to the eschaton. Everything has to be a simulacrum in this, including all of our endeavors. So it comes back to the circular economy is the goal of this. Which is that nothing points back to the original, but the death of our culture, in particular, our Western or Christian culture. And when I say West in this reference, I'm talking about Christendom specifically. But yeah, it's because this is an ontological reality, Christ kingship, it takes a long time to kill it. And you kind of a whack-a-mole, you're going to kind of do some death over there and it's going to reassert itself because somewhere in the essence of our being, we long for reality. And we oftentimes realize that we want to comport ourselves with natural law. But I'm going to get back to you, David.
Yeah, again, this might be a little bit all over the place, but in my research about the French Revolution, one thing that does come out is one of the roots of the French Revolution is actually Protestantism, and Protestantism. One of the main effects of Protestantism was the birth and the spreading of economic liberalism, and we often. Again, it's sort of easy to understand and easy to say that communism and fascism were fruits of the French Revolution. But the genealogy that I have seen is that one of the key foundations of the French Revolution was actually the Protestant Revolution. And Protestantism brought about economic liberalism. And if you look deeply into the French Revolution, you see that economic liberalism is, again, it's often presented to us, again, the peasants rising up against the king and so on, but a lot had to do with the spread of economic liberalism and the enrichment of a wealthy class. And I think that's something that we see today during the pandemic, the enrichment of the wealthier classes. And so economic liberalism is a guiding, it's a thread that connects these things. And I think, getting back to what Will was saying about agriculture, I agree with his point, and I think that the end game, so to speak, is to financialize. I don't even know if that's a word, we sort of have that word in French, but to financialize the agricultural industry. In other words, to turn small farms into big farms run by BlackRock, where agricultural activity will still take place, but it will be run from the stock market or something like that. It will be run by banks. It will be run by banks. It will be run by investment funds. Sort of the way the home rental industry in the United States is now being taken over and run by investment corporations and things like that. So I think that the fight against the farmers is true. You have to get on board. You have to adopt these new practices. But the end game, so to speak, is the corporatization. Again, I'm sort of searching for a word here, but turning agriculture into a big business where the farmers themselves might be employees of BlackRock or something along
Absolutely.
those lines.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. In God's economic order that was realized in Christendom, all things are a revelation of God, but the whole system begins in the family unit, the economia in Greek, and so it's organic and it moves back up toward the revelation. And so you're going this new revolution, starting from the commanding heights of the economy, the people that have dethroned God and are going to remake this in their own image, but yeah, I just want to get to the punchline because everybody's kind of going over here and here and here, and we can kind of the famous letter that Mark sent kind of put it off there. We can see this. I can verify this from several other points. But in order for the messianic kingdom to arrive, all wealth must be controlled by this handful of people that reckon themselves the messianic people of our age. So it's really it is about a hatred of farmers, of private property. It is all of those things, and it's had to go through a lot of iterations within liberalism, which is, I'm sorry, liberalism is Luciferian. It's part of this agenda. It's just a necessary. Everything it comes as an angel of light. It sounds nice, but yes, these farmers, and it breaks my heart whether they're in Italy or they're Dutch. Some of these are multi-generational. Can you imagine that, having this in your family and being able to maintain that for sometimes a century, sometimes 2 centuries, and now the power of the government, and like you said, and it's great in Europe. These people are regarded as the salt of the earth. To take them and to just visually in front of everybody destroy them because you can, in the name of some non-being, some fantasy that's not real, fear, false evidence appearing real. And so taking that and yeah, that's what's going on. And right now we're getting to the point by 2030, BlackRock will have bought up 75% of the real estate in this country, and usually under other shell companies. This is all being built in or being pulled back into the commanding heights of the economy. But anyway, I do want to, just so people are not pulling over here and stonecutters over here, and I get kind of tired of that. This is exactly typologically what's happening to prepare for the messianic age. And we should always remind ourselves, in the book of the Apocalypse, our reaction shouldn't be, as one of the letters you read, neutral or lukewarm. We should get engaged in this, beginning with our consciousness, and we can talk about other ways we can attack this. But if we don't know what's going on, and I'll shut up here for a moment, but again, part of this revolution is the revolution of Vatican II. I'm not saying there's not for people are going to get triggered. I'm not saying that there's not still a hermeneutic, a continuity, but there was a revolution. It's the same revolution and the same bad actors involved.
Well, again, Will sort of took the quote from me. I had that quote lined up myself about the Vatican II being the 1789 of the Church, and so yeah, that connection is definitely there. The other thing is all of this that's happening now with the farmers reminds me of Soviet collectivization, and I say to myself, this looks an awful lot to me like the old Soviet Union, and the collectivization of farms, the turning of farmers into employees of larger entities, the severing of the tie to the land of the farmers. In other words, the farmers might end up having a job at some huge collective farm or something like that, but it won't be their land, and they will not be working it themselves for their own benefit. It's so I see, again, it might sound a little bit outlandish, but I see a kind of Sovietization of the economy, even of the political system here in Europe. Another thing that I had maybe lined up to talk about a little bit was simply to talk about the European Union. Many I think, most people in America think that, well, France has a government and Spain has a government and Belgium has a government and so on. But the reality is that we all live under the European Union, and European Union law always is primary here in Europe. And the European Union is profoundly undemocratic, and I would even say anti-democratic. The structures have a kind of coating of democracy, but the reality is vastly different. There's basically no democracy. The citizens of the European Union have basically no say and no institutions in which to have a say in how they are governed and in what kind of laws are put into place in Europe. So the European Union, in a somewhat oblique way, but a real way, does resemble the Soviet Union in many, many ways. And one final point that I will bring up, which is just mind blowing, is there we're doing this again. I don't think some of these things are a little complicated. I don't want to go into too many details, but there is. I'm just trying to make it as simple as possible. There is talk of asking French homeowners to open their homes to migrants and allowing people, basically asking people to double up to accept migrants into their homes. Not only migrants is sort of an extreme example, but students, old people. Basically, there's this idea that there's not going to be enough housing in the future. And if you have a house that's too big, you have to start preparing yourself to making some of that space in your house available to people who need that space. And that sounds to me like 1919 Russia, where the wealthier people were forced to give up their homes and allow other people to move in. And it sounds crazy, but this is actually spoken about in the media in France. And the way that the tax structure, again, our tax structure here, we have to report the amount of property that we own. We have to report the square footage, basically, if you want to put it that way, and how many rooms we have, and so on. This is how deep it goes, and a lot of people are saying, "Why do we have to? Why do we have to say this?" But we see what's on the horizon. It's going to be a push to get people with large dwellings to open them up to people who aren't part of the family. And it's an attack on private property, and this is just coming along. The media brings it up as if it's the most normal thing in the world, and French normies who watch the media say, well, yeah, that sounds good. Let's let some foreigners into our house and let them live here. I mean, it's so crazy, but it's happening. It's real.
It's an attack on the household economy as the symbol of natural order and the proper structure of a society, so that the family no longer is the patriarchal structure. The hierarchical nature of that is no longer.
I'm reminded of the scene from Dr. Zhivago when Dr.
I was
Zhivago
just going to say
returns.
that.
Yeah, he returns back to his house I guess it's in Moscow or St. Petersburg, and there are a whole bunch of people living there, and the commissar comes in and everything. And we're I think that what we're living through in Europe is a kind of soft fascism. Again, I follow what's happening in the United States closely, and I know that things are pretty wild over there. But in Europe, it might be at another level. The dictatorship of environmentalism, for lack of a better term, is transforming our life. The environmentalism is being used as an excuse to bring about changes that nobody would ever agree to. And again, I come back to both you, to Doug and to Will, about things you've been saying about reality and being attached to reality. And I think that many people in Europe simply don't live in reality. Either they're afraid of it or they don't like it. And these environmental rules, again, I'm a university professor, I have students, and I can tell you that environmentalism is their religion. They believe everything hook, line, and sinker. Um, and you know, you're in trouble if you question anything about the environmental agenda.
Let me cut in and just ask you. This is going to be kind of an anecdotal observation about, because I noticed that you had a photo of a priest blessing a farmer going off, and we know in the depths of the sort of socialist malaise of Canada, there was some excitement about the truckers. There is some excitement about the farmers that are protesting. Whether or not people get it or not, it's another question. I know that sometimes. If I were just going to ask you, are people kind of waking up to this or not? With my own students, um, there's it's there's nothing. There is it gets less and less and less every year, and they have no sense of absurdity. I'll give you one example. Just cut in here. A few years ago, when I was just talking about the case that came out of New York, where they extended the right to abort a woman all the way till 9 months. When I bring that up like 3, 4, 5 years ago, they're like kind of shocked. People have desensitized to that. I know it's because of what they're consuming in the media, but that life and death, a war over here, a war over there, it just they're back on their video games, and they are. I don't know what you call it. You could call anybody a nice person, but there's got to be a death of the soul when I could, unless the media told them to feel something, they're not going to feel it.
Oh, they
And so, what do you make of this?
that's an exact description of what I see here. It is and it gets worse and worse with time. Not many years ago, just a few years ago, I would try to engage students in debates. I would bring out some thoughts or ideas that maybe you might call controversial. Now, in a sense, I don't even bother, because the basis is not, they have no basis for dissent or questioning anything. And I remember when I first started here, French young people are kind of rebellious, and they're into politics, or they were, they're into politics and into debating things and having discussions and so on. Now, forget it. It's what I sometimes I even say to them in class: if it's not on TikTok, you don't even care. It's I've never, see, I can't say that human nature has changed, because human nature is always the same. But there is something about human beings which I think is being changed by technology. Um, the phone. I used to tell the students to not use the phone in class. And now I almost can't do it, because I don't think they can't even perceive existence without their phones. And the only reality that they see is what's on the phone. Anything, I think that they could be told anything on the phone and they will believe it. They could see something in front of their faces, but not on the phone, and they wouldn't believe it. That is how deep it goes. And I would like to say, hey, I'm kind of optimistic about this or that, but with regard to students, with regard to critical thinking, with regard to the power that the media and technology has over young people, I don't know how or whether we get out of this. It has only gotten worse with time.
No, when you present something like, if somebody, like you're saying about um, Pfizer, if you dare to question that somebody's going to inject something with no liability, we can say this 4 years ago. I would just say this to people: you want to take an experimental something with no liability, and you're the crazy person for questioning. We're not questioning. And I could present that today in class, and there's nothing there. And it's, oh boy, I don't know what to say about it. So, but yet at the other time, I'd have to say this, and that's interesting that you say that, because we know this social engineering is systematic, it's lockstep, and it's having the same effect it is on my students as France. So that's a validation that you said that. It's not a surprise, but it's a validation, this process. And soon they will be the ones that have no reservations about integrating their body with this phone.
True.
So it's
Yeah.
permanently a part of them. So
And
I don't think the idea of cyborgism is something they're scared of.
sorry, I missed that. I didn't hear it.
Yeah, I don't think the young people have a fear of cyborgism, about merging with
No,
machines.
no.
I think
Yeah. One thing, again, I'd like to say some positive things. I don't want us to dwell on negative apocalyptic issues and things like that, but I'll say a few words about the traditional Catholic community in France. Um, if you're looking for some dissent, if you're looking for some clarity of thought, if you're looking for young people who really are faithful, aware, and militant in the sense of church militant, it would be in the traditional community in France. I mentioned at the beginning of my talk today that I had, by accident, discovered the traditional Latin Mass and a traditional community here in Lyon. And now I'm the old guy at the parish. What absolutely amazes me is that now this parish that I attend is basically a youth parish. There is a among certainly a small minority of French people or French young people, there is a desire for truth. I think that human beings will always desire truth. There will always be a remnant that is desiring truth. And in my parish here in Lyon, you have I would say a majority of people under 30. And I think that must drive the Teilhard de Chardinists a little bit crazy. How could this be happening? How could it be that these young people that we thought we had conquered and commandeered their souls and their minds, how could it be that they are coming back to the traditional Catholic faith? I don't even really like saying the Mass, because I mean the Mass, it's certainly very, very important. I mean it's extremely important, but it's really a return to the Catholic faith, and the Catholic faith as it has been taught for 2,000 years, and as we have received it. So we have a tremendous number of young people in our parish, and they really do give me a lot of hope. There's another thing. Our parish, I don't really even have the numbers, but I think maybe I'd call it a small parish. But last weekend, our pastor, during his sermon, gave a very interesting data point. He said there are 58 catechumens applying to join the Catholic Church through this parish. So 58 is a big number. Again, if you had said to me, how many catechumens do you think are entering the Catholic Church? I would say, well, 3 or 4 or something like that. But in fact, 58 it's a tremendous number. And so despite everything, despite the onslaught of the media and the onslaught of technology and the social engineering, young people are still coming to the church. They are still coming to the traditional faith. They are still asking for baptism. Just this past Sunday, there was an entrance into the catechumenate of several young Muslim women. And so you even have many of the new catechumens are French people who were never baptized, who were not raised in any kind of a religious home. But you also have an increasing number of Muslims. And again, I'm not, trying to create false images or false hope that there's this huge conversion, but conversion is possible. And you do have among young Muslim people, particularly young Muslim women, who want to come into the Catholic Church. And we had a beautiful ceremony last Sunday for the entrance into the catechumenate of these young Muslim ladies, and it was very, very uplifting. The other thing, in terms of resistance to the general situation, I would say that traditionalist Catholics in France are certainly at the vanguard of communications, awareness, teaching, trying to get the word out, trying to get just simply to return to the truth and try to tell the truth about things and to get other people interested in the truth. And I say that very proudly. I mean, the traditional Catholic community in France is very, very vibrant, very alive. And there's been talk about traditionis custodes and how this has been implemented in France. And it was very interesting because a few months ago, there was a meeting in Lourdes of the Catholic bishops of France, and they were discussing the implementation of traditionis custodes to repress and do away with the Latin Mass. And the bishops formulated a response to the Vatican and said, this cannot be the way. We cannot do this. The traditionalist movement in France is so big, it is so alive, that the violence required to get rid of it is something that we simply cannot stomach. And so they said, we have to find another way of living together with the traditionalists and sort of integrating the traditionalists into the life of the church in France. One other thing to get back to the beginning is, I know a lot about the traditionalist movement in the world and in France, and it really does go back to the French Revolution. You could almost say that the traditionalist Catholic movement in France began with the French Revolution in opposition to the French Revolution and its godless principles. And it has stayed that way for 200 years. Again, it's not simply a question of the liturgy. It's about fidelity to the Catholic faith and the refusal of living in a world without God, the refusal of raising children without the faith. And the traditionalist Catholics are at the vanguard of that. One other thing I will mention, following the lockdowns, which took place in 2020, 2021, and so on, is sort of the disappearance of the notion of right and left in France, right-wing politics, left-wing politics. When I first came to France, that was always a big thing: who's right-wing, who's left-wing, and so on. But there's been a kind of blurring of these distinctions, because you have a lot of people who maybe previously might have been called left-wing, but they've become very, very aware of what's going on and are, I guess I could say, they're coming around in a certain way. Again, maybe perhaps not necessarily coming back to the faith, but they are questioning the system that's in place. They are questioning a lot of their assumptions about the way the world is organized. And that's something I find very, very interesting in France, because again, you had this very sharp distinction of right wing, left wing, and so on. That's beginning to disappear. And so if I am sort of complimenting the traditionalist Catholics for their stand for truth within France, I also have to give a shout out to some of these non-religious people, but who are really searching and have recognized that there's something in their worldview, something in their mental universe and framework, which simply has been shattered by what has happened over the past several years. Also by a lot of the actions of the government. Again, you have a lot of sort of left-wing people in France who are very, very in favor of the farmers. I mean, who doesn't like farmers? Who doesn't like agriculture? And so the government coming out with a lot of these policies, people who might previously have been leftists, or maybe we can even call them leftists now, they are coming around and saying, wait a minute, there's something happening here which is very, very wrong. And anyway, I just wanted to mention that.
That's good. That's
Mm.
good. I think we round up, and I think the important thing to remember with a lot of this black pill stuff is that God is still at work, and we need to focus our eyes, be aware of what's happening, be on guard, but we need to focus on God and how He can turn these things around and bend them toward His will, and we have to be able to see that. And I think it's important that we we're aware ourselves that we don't want to be neither hot nor cold. And so I thought that was great. That seems to be a universal trend with the traditional Latin Mass, and it does seem to be probably, as far as I can see, the most powerful instrument that we have of maintaining history, hierarchy, and the sacramental life. In other words, preserving the reality that was made imminent with the incarnation of Christ. I'm going to leave it to you, Will, if you have a last kind of thought, and otherwise we're gonna wrap it up.
Sure, yeah, I was just going to say that evil has no reality in and of itself. It's the privation of reality. And so, just as nature abhors a vacuum, being fills every void. So, what we're talking about with evil, with like the egregore, is the alignment of wills and the alignment of convergence of trends toward unreality, toward falsehood. So, by pointing back to truth and trusting in the order of being, then it's not a matter of these heroic, societal shifts. It's just a matter of bending consciousness back toward truth. And um, yeah, so I think that's the answer to the black pill position, and that's what we're trying to do here. You know.
Okay. Fantastic. Um, yeah, one final word about to just maybe to wrap things up is a shout out concerning the pilgrimage in Chartres, which takes place every year, and it is the number one event of the traditional Catholic community in France. It is a pilgrimage which goes over 3 days on the Pentecost weekend from Paris, traditionally from Notre Dame in Paris, to the Cathedral of Chartres. And it has been growing in leaps and bounds over the past several years, with lots of young people, lots of people from other countries coming and participating. Last year, there were 16,000
Wow.
participants in this pilgrimage. 20,000 applied, and they had to be turned away. The 4,000 people had to be turned away. And this year, they're trying to. They've made some hires. They've expanded their operation, and they say that this year they will be able to host 20,000, mainly young people, walking on this pilgrimage, culminating in a beautiful traditional mass at Chartres Cathedral. So again, a word of hope, looking forward, and really being hopeful and optimistic with regard to the future.
Excellent. Yeah, faith, hope, and love, and we got to keep hope is a necessary part of keeping all of those together. And I know Michael Matt likes to promote that event. I think it sounds like a blast. Um, but oh, did you have another idea
No,
there, David?
that's about it. I just again, just before we break off, I want to wish both of you a very holy Lent. This is, of course, a very beautiful season, and I've read that Lent is a kind of sacrament, and it is a sacrament available to us, and we should try our best to profit from the season. And of course, I wish a very holy Lent to the both of you and to your families, and thank you very much for having me on. It was a pleasure. I enjoyed sort of sending this little postcard to you from Europe to exchange some thoughts about what's going on over here. Also to talk a little bit about France, a country, of course, that is very dear to me now, which is my second home, my second homeland, and that's about it.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, and I've really enjoyed having people that are followers of the channel come up and be able to share some of their ideas with our members in our small community here. So thank you very much. Well, it's been great seeing you again, Mr. Tucker, and for everybody out there across the Anglosphere and beyond. Um, I hope you are. I hope you all are doing very well. So this has been Dr. Deep State, and we will be getting back to you very soon. Thank you very much.